G'day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Had about a month or so wait on this, so excited to kick it all off. We'll start in about 2 seconds. A few more people arriving in now, but we'll send the recording out to everyone. So if we miss it, you'll have plenty of time to come back and see it. So yes, welcome for everyone. My name's Alex, so I'll be somewhat the host today with Dave. And this will be a future of automated drone operations with a focus on drone in the box. So we might kick off there. We'll jump to the next screen. So I'll do the honors. Introducing Dave, you guys can see there on the screen. So Dave is our founder and CEO for FlyFreely. He's a dual mechanical and structural engineer, 12 years in the engineering consultancy roles, has got a doctorate from 2007 with a focus in drones, graduate of the Institute of Company Directors, and 15 years in for-profit, non-profit organizations. So it's got a wide range of experience across resource, energy, and construction industries, and very passionate about adopting new technologies. So probably no one more fitting to talk about this topic than Dave. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Dave.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. My name's David Cole, co-founder, CEO, as Alex mentioned. And so today I thought we'd, kick off by a little, for people who don't know about us, a little bit about our journey. So we started off in the drone industry back in 2013 as a commercial drone services provider. So working in the mining, energy sectors, saw the opportunities for drones. So we started bringing that technology to businesses back in the early days. In that process, we had to, do a lot of the learning about, how do we scale up operations? How do we manage all the regulatory compliance, manage our operations, et cetera, et cetera. So we started building our own software platform to help us with that. In about 2017, we started that, and then we basically launched that to the market in 2018. So that's primarily the key thing we focus on today. Since that time, we've gone through the CASA verification process to provide automated rules checking and automated airspace authorizations. And more recently, we've actually gone through the ISO certification for information security. And really what we're focused on, this year and the following years will be enabling automated operations. So that's obviously what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it. So first question, what do we mean by automated operations? And this is a bit of a loaded question because there's lots of different, lots of people have different views on what automated means. I'll go through what, our view of what automated means. So you're all aware of kind of your typical visual line of sight operations. So, everyone's doing this day in, day out at the moment. So obviously you've got the pilot on site, the drone's in line of sight at all times, and pilot's basically doing all the tasks. A step up from that is beyond visual line of sight. So obviously the drone's out of the sight of the pilot and may or may not have an observer to assist with that. But largely, it's the same sort of processes involved. So what we're talking about with automated operations is there's now no longer any pilot or observer on site. They're located remotely. So what does that mean? So there's no one on site. So everything needs to be controlled over the internet now, which brings a lot of challenges. But more importantly, it's things like the drone now needs to take off and land automatically. There's no one on site to actually check that process, make sure it's happening correctly. So the systems have to do it itself. It then has to recharge it. Again, we don't have anyone on site who can go and load in some new batteries. So how's that going to work? And then finally, there's no one to grab the SD card and, copy data off the SD card. So that has to happen automatically as well. So when you kind of put all these things together, you need really a what's referred to as a drone in the box to actually perform all these tasks automatically for you. So that's really when we're saying automated operations, this is the key difference is all those sort of functions which a pilot would normally do is no longer being done by the pilot. So what do these systems look like? I'm sure, everyone sort of had a look at, a few of these systems that are coming online. Here's just a small sample of them. On the top left there, we've got the DJI system. Bottom left, the Skydio system. So both multi-copter type systems. And in the middle there, we've got the Autel system, which is a VTOL in a box. So, variety of different types of drones are getting the supporting hardware needed to perform these automated operations. What do they all have in common? Two things that they all need, and that's power and communication. So without those two, you're literally going nowhere. But once you do have that in place, then you can essentially have near constant operations. Essentially, the limiting factor is the battery recharge time. So as fast as you can charge those batteries, you in theory could have it continuously operating. So how are they typically deployed? The one of the most common ones is simple routes. So essentially a simple predefined flight path where the drone's going to go. And really this is ideal for those things like security patrols. So this could be inside a building or externally. And then all those surveillance and monitoring operations. So, particularly on beaches or at events and things like that. Then we go into the more sophisticated routes, which are kind of your mapping routes, which everyone's sort of familiar with as well. And this is really around getting volumetrics out of those analyses. And then the more complex ones where you start actually doing inspections of bridges and dam walls and any of those fixed type assets. Thirdly, the most probably the most simple of all is just going to point of interest. So, manually controlling the drone remotely. And typically that's, going to be used for sort of ad hoc inspections or some sort of emergency response. Another really interesting application is actually being able to hop between boxes. So this is really for long linear assets. You can actually have multiple boxes and the drone hopping between boxes. So that's really applications in the power line and pipeline sector. You can really start to automate that whole process end to end. So, we've sort of looked at, briefly about, the systems and sort of how they're deployed. So, what's kind of makes them unique and really beneficial to use? And this is really around, where the efficiency gains come from. So if we look at a standard sort of operation, you've got a pilot on site. That pilot's got to go and plan the mission. I'll put some, estimated numbers here. And, they may or may not be right, but I think it gives you a sense of the timing. So let's just say that they spend 30 minutes to plan. They've got to then travel to site. So call that 30 minutes. They've got to, set up. So get the drones out, all those things you need to do, check all your batteries. Then you can actually do some flying. And so this is the only value adding step in this whole process is the actual flying. Everything else is kind of, necessary to make it all happen. Then once you've obviously completed the mission, you then have to do the reverse. So spend your time packing up, traveling back to the office, and then reconciling all your records. So, updating all your logs and all those sorts of things. And then on top of that, you actually managing all your data. So, getting your SD cards out, uploading data, and managing all those sorts of things. So where this is different is we can start to basically streamline and eliminate some of these processes by operating remotely. So the first thing we can do is, we're operating in the same area frequently, so we can actually start to reduce the time it takes to plan the missions. We're totally eliminating the need for travel and the need for setup, still doing the exact same flying, and then also totally eliminating the pack up and travel back. And then obviously on the reconciliation side, we can also start to automate that as well. And then on the data management, because we've captured all the images, we can now manage those automatically as well. So when you start to look at this, you go from something that was 4 hours traditionally to something that's 1 hour. So you end up with this, huge potential time saving. Up to sort of 75% of the pilot's time is saved. So that looks pretty awesome. So you go, well, hang on, I've seen these drone in the box things before. If the savings are that awesome, why haven't we seen them everywhere, right now? And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I think that the argument as to why we'll start to see them more and more right now is really these two reasons. So the process of getting a regulator approval was, previously it was very bespoke and quite costly. The introduction of the SORA has obviously given the regulators a framework in which to assess these types of complex operations. So that's, greatly simplified and standardized the approach to assessing these types of operations. So the costs of the regulator have dropped significantly. And on top of that, the hardware costs are starting to drop now. So, where systems previously were over $200,000 each, you're now getting multiple systems in the market well below 100,000. So when you start to combine these two things and look at the economics of why it makes sense for automated drone operations, you start to see why. So this is a return on investment calculator we've created to help assess the viability of drone in the box. So if we look here, I'll just hone in here on one specific thing, and that's really the factor of the capital cost. So previously, as I mentioned, between the regulator costs and hardware costs, you would be around $300,000 per drone in the box. And even those benefits we showed, you would still have a negative ROI. But what happens when you get that capital cost below $100,000? You start to get really quite crazy return on investment. So, payback period within half a year for these systems. And this is based on a relatively small operation. So basically 5 pilots being replaced by 1 drone in the box. So just from a pure economics point of view, the savings are pretty substantial. So what does this all mean? Where are we all going? And where is this all headed? So we'll start off with where we came from. So, what happened back in the day is, the flight control became automated, right? And that started to really help reduce costs, improve quality of the data you capture. We then kind of progressed into this phase of what I call automated management, which is essentially what we do. So really trying to streamline all your compliance, all your operations management. But now we're moving into this era of automated operations. So really a bit of a step change. There's a step change in the savings and efficiencies that are going to happen. So that means disruption. 100% guaranteed. It means disruption. So that's what I think we're in for at the moment. Beyond that, there's a lot of work going on around automating the regulatory compliance side of things. So how do you make obtaining approvals and all those sorts of things easier, faster, more automated? And then beyond that, it's actually going to work around how do you make the operations fully automated or autonomous. So this is where there's very little to no pilot oversight, and obviously the drones are making a lot of the decisions. And you might be thinking, well, that's going to be years and years off, and it may well be. But be aware that the same people who bought us SORA have already started thinking about how they're going to evaluate fully automated / autonomous operations. So there's lots of work happening already on that front, which will be coming down the line over the next several years. So as I mentioned, disruption is coming. So disruption, obviously, there's two sides to it. One is the threats that it brings, the other is the opportunities that it brings. And really what I thought is, giving some of our thoughts on where we see this going, particularly what it means from, an individual pilot's point of view, and then to a business who actually uses drones. So in terms of a pilot, I think it is unfortunately going to mean a reduced number of pilots required. And also potentially a lot of the, asset investments people have made will start to lose value as these new systems kind of start to replace those things. Flip side of that is there's now opportunities for specialized remote pilots who have got all the necessary skills to manage remote operations. The other probably big one is now that you've got no pilot on site, who's going to maintain all these systems? So that's definitely an opportunity that'll be coming down the line. From the business's point of view, really the opportunity is getting that step change in efficiency. A couple of drone in the box setups, providing near 24/7 coverage is a huge gain. And probably more importantly is actually embedding drones into operations. So, if someone leaves or someone's not available, then the capability is not available. That's kind of, been traditionally what's happened. With this, basically the capability will always be available. So that's really something that can change the game. Then in terms of the threats, well, your competitors. So if you don't start doing this and your competitors do, that's going to put you at a disadvantage. And the other one really is the risk around implementation. So we'll dive into this in a minute, and really the potential risks around implementation. If you get it wrong and it doesn't work, then that can set you back. So what's required to make all this happen? So obviously the first thing is you've got some sort of location or site where you want to operate, and we've got our little box here on the left. Technically the ground support equipment and the drone itself. So that's obviously at a minimum what you need on site. On top of that, you're going to need some things to manage your air risk. So we'll get into what these systems look like in a bit more. But that's essentially, the on-site requirements. Back in the remote operations center, where the remote pilot's going to be, you have a few things you need in there. So obviously the remote pilot station. So this is digging into everything about, what seat are they sitting in? What's the monitor? All those really, if the person's sitting here all day long, how fatigued are they going to get? So all those considerations. The big one is around the operations control software. So this is the software the pilot's using to manage everything. How is it, displaying information? Can a pilot be looking at this all day long and not get fatigued? All those sorts of issues. So obviously in between those two things, we need a connection. And that's really the C2 slash C3 link, as they call it. So basically, how do you get a reliable connection between both of those? Then on top of that, you're actually looking at the operator themselves. So who's the chief pilot and what do the operations manuals say about managing all these types of operations? So at a very high level, these are all the, bits and pieces you'll need. So you put all these together into a SOAR application to the regulator and submit that. On top of that, you've also got a few things that are outside explicitly what's required in a SOAR application. And this is really for, to turn this into something that is productive, right? So how do you take the data that you've captured, process it? How are you going to install everything, all the project management associated with that? So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. It's not as simple and straightforward as it would seem. So what are the key considerations? As we mentioned, air risk is probably one of the major ones. What's that about? It's, at a very basic level, how do you detect other aircraft and how do you avoid them? So really today, there's a couple of ways you can achieve that. One is through a combination of different ground-based systems to manage that. The other is to actually have an onboard detect and avoid system on the drone itself. But they typically are limited to quite large drones. In the future, the FIM system, or the unmanned traffic management system that Air Services is working on, will be able to provide that, but that's probably going to be highly location dependent. In terms of the ground risk mitigation, so really, again, the questions you're trying to ask here: how do you avoid people altogether? If you can't avoid them, how do you reduce the effects, or how do you reduce the likelihood of a crash? So there's various ways you can do that. Everything from making sure you got redundant systems in the drone, through to having parachutes on board, through to having, downward looking cameras that automatically detect people and reroute to avoid them altogether. So the other big one is around communications connectivity. So obviously, if you lose this connection, everything, has to go into sort of fail safes, and you have to manage all those fail safes some way. So, ideally, you don't want to lose the connection at all. So, having primary backup sort of connections, critical. And then, assuming you do lose connectivity, what does the drone do? What are your internal procedures that actually help to manage all the things that can go wrong? And finally, as we mentioned before, the operations control software, really critical, mainly because whatever you say in your procedures, the software has to be capable of doing it. So if you say in your procedures, I have a button which will terminate the flight and crash the, drone into the ground, the software needs to have that ability. Has to have the ability, like if you're saying, I'll perform some certain functions when I know a certain service is degraded. How do you know about that service is degraded? So it's really tightly linked, your procedures and the capabilities of the software. And on top of that, it's also trying to help the remote pilot. Once you start to integrate all these different air risk, ground risk, communications, you all of a sudden have 4 or 5 different applications that the pilot needs to be looking at while they're trying to fly, from different data sources and different things going on. So one of the key things is how do you reduce their workload by integrating all those systems together, making it pretty smart, so that the pilot's workload is reduced. So that kind of all leads us on to sort of what we're aiming to achieve in helping people start and sort of grow their automated drone operations. And really, it starts with our existing platform, the Office app, which is basically the operations control software. And from there, we've already started integrating with the DJI system and various other supporting systems to essentially tie all the pieces together needed for operations. What is coming down the line is the airspace integration and regulatory automation. So for those that weren't aware, we were involved in the prototype development of the FIM system, which is the traffic control system, which is now scheduled, I believe, to be ready by 2025. So as that capability comes online, we'll integrate those functions into the system. But beyond all this sort of regulatory and operational management, it's really how do we then tie all this into existing workflows? So, various people using various, data processing software, how do we tie that all in together so we can actually have this whole system working really well? And then on top of that, how does it tie into your existing enterprise systems? So again, simplifying the whole end-to-end operation. And to sort of help enable that, we're announcing our Drone in a Box early adopter program. So what is that all about? Really, we want to actually demonstrate some fully end-to-end automated operations in real-world applications. So, getting the drone to fly is great, but really we want to show how is this actually going to work day in, day out, full data processing, complete end-to-end. So we're looking for people who actually want to basically have their preferred hardware and software integrated with our solutions, so we can actually demonstrate that in real-world conditions. optionally as well, through various partners, we can assist with the regulatory approvals, the remote operation centers, and getting the hardware and all those bits and pieces. And so who's it really for? It is going to be for larger businesses that do need that fully integrated solution. One thing we will be doing is limiting it to one business per vertical. So really, this is a bit of an opportunity to get sort of first mover advantage in actually implementing a sort of end-to-end solution. And the how, it's pretty straightforward, developing a scope and timeline for implementation and getting stuck into it. Sorry.
So those different types of industries you mentioned, what sort of industries you're looking to work with?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention the industries. We're typically looking for sort of the mining sector, energy sector, but anyone who's got an interesting application will be certainly interested in working with them. So beyond that, really, how else can we help? So really, the first question we ask people is where are you on your drone journey? On a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being we've just started, 5 being, we're looking to scale or do more complex operations, through to, hey, we want to go hell for leather and fully automate everything. So everyone's at different stages. We try to just help wherever we can. So if you're sort of in that 1 to 7 range, our current platform is probably ideal for you. So if you're interested in that, we'd be happy to help. Typically, that involves sort of establishing where you're currently at, helping you develop a bit of a plan, a bit of a business case, and going from there. And then if you really want to get into the full automation, happy to discuss about our early adopters program. So hopefully that was short and sweet for you today. Yeah, and thank you for your time, and I guess we'll jump into questions.
If you need to read them out to you.
Yeah, sure.
So we got first one here. So we got Ben here. So how are pre-flight checks completed, such as inspecting props and other physical damage of the drone for the drone in the box scenarios?
Yeah, so there's there is a camera. So as part of that, there will be camera systems that are actually looking at the drone to do some of that basic risk mitigation, essentially. So that there will be requirements for additional systems like that. You actually have other interesting things that happen. How do you know that the airspace above the drone in the box, a crane hasn't appeared or something like that, right? So how do you manage all those risks? Or where you've got to land as an emergency landing site, how do you know that that's clear? So it probably will require additional camera systems to actually help identify those problems and manage those risks.
We have another one here from another attendee. So is Starlink an option for continuous connectivity?
Yeah, basically, I think Starlink is a bit of a game changer. I think that's going to be the primary means of communication. They've just introduced some new plans specifically for what do they call it? Mission critical operations. So you basically get preferenced on the on bandwidth and preferenced in terms of reliability. So I think things like that will be significant to actually making this work, which wasn't really there probably 2 years ago, and it solves that huge connectivity problem.
God, just give it a minute for some other questions. Thank you. They can hear me, so maybe ask if anyone's got any other questions.
Yeah, has anyone else got any other questions?
Here we go.
Feel free.
So Without being part of the early adopters program, is it possible to have remote capability for drone the box now?
So we're currently working on the actual, the capability to have that just as a pure standalone module, but it's not ready yet. So, one of the key things we want to try and achieve with the early adopter program is tying in all the other pieces to make this work, because there are quite a few pieces to pull together.
Turn the microphone on because people can't hear me on that side. So how often is hands-on maintenance required for drone in a box?
So different manufacturers have different requirements. I can't recall off the top of my head. But there obviously is some intervals. I can't recall if it's every 100 hours. There's a battery swap out, but it really depends on the manufacturer and the way they manage the drones. So some of them will reuse the same batteries over and over again. Some will have a magazine of batteries that can be swapped in and out. So it's a little bit up to how they've kind of designed their systems to work.
Another one here from Andrew. So what are some of the more unusual or interesting potential applications that you've seen proposed for the drone in the box / the BVLOS solutions?
Yeah, I really quite like the long linear asset type applications. I think that has the potential to be really quite interesting. But yeah, there's sort of all sorts of interesting things that could be done, particularly in the agricultural sector. We haven't quite seen those larger drones come through yet, but I would suggest they're probably a year or two away. I think we'll see some quite large drones being sort of working out of a box like that.
Yep. So we got from Shane on the regulatory side. Have any platforms been approved under the BVLOS?
I don't know, to be honest. It would be a question for CASA, and they probably wouldn't tell you. So yeah, I don't know.
Awesome. Another one here. So from is a drone in a box. Do you see this as always being installed in a fixed location? For linear inspection, the fast deployment for a box would be ideal, but the takeoff landing location will change along the line. Would FlyFreely support mobile drone in the box applications?
Yes, so we're actually working with a partner who's building a trailer-based system. So literally everything on a trailer, including the solar panels. So literally you could pick it up, drop it anywhere, let it do its thing for a week, come back, move it on. So it's kind of really flexible. Again, end of the day, all we need is connectivity and power. And as long as those two things exist, however you make that work, we can support it.
Awesome. How is air radio monitored remotely and radio calls made?
Yeah, so that's up to the on the implementation side, how you're going to set up your radio system, if that's a requirement, to basically being able to talk from the remote pilot through to actually transmitting at the other end. And that becomes challenging depending on sort of how you deploy. So if you start to do those sort of long range deployments, then you actually have to have that capability on the drone itself. Whereas a smaller range could actually have that from a base station. So there's a few different systems out there that sort of enable you to do that. But yeah, that's kind of really deployment specific on how you actually want to run that.
Awesome. And then one here from Pierre. So how about data jamming?
I have absolutely no idea, to be totally honest with you, on that side of things. I guess it's going to be one of the emerging, areas. Like all these things, it's some of these things are not really known until people deploy it and people start doing nefarious things. So yeah, I have no doubt that will crop up as a concern. I think right now people are just trying to get their head around just getting it to work at all. So I think that's kind of where things are at right now. But yes, you're totally right. It'll definitely be something that will come down the pipeline for sure.
Awesome. From Matthew here, we've got how do you monitor weather?
Yeah, so typically the systems will have some sort of weather station to get that sort of localized weather, because obviously they all have limits on what conditions they can actually operate in. Beyond that, looking at other forecast weather services and pulling those APIs in uh, to in essence, provide you a bit of a heads up of what might be coming. And obviously, as part of the integrations we're trying to do is factoring all those things in. So again, the pilot doesn't have to sit there and be constantly looking at the weather. Our system can basically automatically provide that sort of heads up that, hey, something's about to deteriorate. You might want to take some action.
Awesome. From Neil here, we got how do you mitigate other drone operations in the area slash route and potential collisions?
Yeah, so I guess that's that's the dream of some of the unmanned traffic management systems. Right now, if you don't know the position of those craft, it's hard to do anything about it. So part of that would be, trying to integrate in different tracking technologies is one way of doing it. The other way is to use some ground-based visual detection systems that can pick up other drones and try and deconflict between those two. So, it will become more of a challenge as more and more systems are deployed and possibly having overlap between different deployments. So yes, I don't think there's any easy solutions, today, but I think they'll be coming down the line as well with different ways to solve those problems.
Awesome. Heaps of really good questions coming in. So we got one from Luke. So what are the costs associated with EAP? What are the fleet requirements?
So I'm not sure I quite get in terms of the physical hardware costs. I assume that's what referring to there. And it varies from manufacturers. The numbers I've heard is everything from sort of 30,000 all the way through to 120,000 plus. So I think it just depends on sort of the provider and their systems.
Awesome. And then one here. Do you currently have any approvals from CASA for remote drone-in-a-box operations from a control center?
No, we don't. We're working on various applications with various customers at the moment. So happy to work through those with other people that are interested.
Awesome. And a two-part question from Kelvin. So how quickly do you think this market might develop? Do you see significant deployments the next 2 years? Any crystal ball on number of deployments that you think will be deployed? And also, do you see it more being regional remote first, or will urban operations be a while away? Be a while away the regulator gains confidence?
Yeah, I think definitely those regional remote areas are probably going to be ideal initially, just because the risks are obviously much lower. In terms of the market, this has the potential to change really, really fast. Like I think, as we sort of shown, the economics are pretty strong. So, eliminating or removing some of the, uh, regulatory type challenges and making that, happen more quickly, can really open it up. And, in terms of numbers, it's really hard to guess, but I would imagine you would consider hundreds within the next sort of 18 months, 24 months being deployed around the country. So yeah, I think it's going to happen pretty quickly and be pretty significant.
Awesome. Another one here. So could subject location and tracking be integrated into drone box systems?
So in terms of tracking, sorry, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but in terms of tracking, yes, one of the key things is you have to know the position of the drone at all times. So all that telemetry must come through. It's basically a requirement. So yes, you would have accurate sort of position information, real time on where the drone is and what it's doing.
Awesome. Got the last couple of questions. So what are some air risk mitigation systems that are in the market?
Uh, so yeah, so there's a couple of ones. The sort of one that springs to mind is the RS automation system that can obviously do ground-based detection. That's kind of one key one. Apart from that, you'd be looking at different, obviously very high-end systems with digital cameras that essentially working as virtual control towers and things like that to actually pick up all the craft automatically. But apart from that, you would then be falling back to things like ADSB or FLARM or some other electronic conspicuity mechanism on the craft itself.
Awesome. One from Michael. So do you become the REOC chief pilot on these missions?
No, it's ultimately up to the user how they want to deploy these systems. That's an option, depending on how people actually want to deploy these systems. So whether you actually want to own everything and manage everything, or you want to outsource it. There's obviously different people out there who can provide different services. So it's definitely one of those things we can help sort of point you in the right direction, depending on how you actually want to do the actual deployment.
Also, the last couple. So we got Justin with respect to remote ID that Department Infrastructure Transport etc. Want to implement. How does Drone Box fit in with a location of controller, ops center or box location?
Yeah, I guess it's unknown. It's a little bit also how they want to, what's the final architecture of remote ID. I would think you would have, again, you would have all that live telemetry coming back. You would know the position of the base. You would know the position of the drone. So I think between those two things, you should be able to get enough data into the system to basically, comply. But I think, yeah, it's still going to what the final architecture looks like. I think is still a little bit up in the air.
Awesome. We've got one here. So you mentioned. Oh, sorry. There you go. You mentioned agriculture. Can you expand on your thoughts where this may potentially go?
Yeah, I think it's just the, how do you get these larger systems? Again, depending on what you're doing with agriculture, because obviously the agriculture's got the complexity. If you're doing spraying and things like that, how are we going to manage those chemicals and how are you going to do all the refills and all those sorts of things? So, there's definitely an opportunity there if someone can solve that problem. Beyond that, you've got all the, mapping applications and then, potentially things like bird scaring and all those sorts of applications where you could start to do some interesting things.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Sorry, we've just run out of time. We'll follow up any more questions via email. If you got any more after this, feel free to shoot them through. If you scan the screen there, just send us a message and we'll follow up with the team. But we'll make this available for everyone on the website and send an email after this with the link should you like to watch it again. But thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, hope to do it again with you soon. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.